So hi everybody. We're very fortunate to have Edahn Golan speaking to us today. The reason why we're having this webinar is, as a member of the WFTB executive, I had the pleasure recently of hearing Edahn's unique statistical data and his analysis of the diamond market. And I was so impressed. I asked Edahn if he would share with the YDs, and he's been very generous in making his time today to speak to us. So first of all, Edahn, thank you from all the YDs worldwide, and we look forward to some of the questions posed to you. And at this point, over to Shai, who'll be moderating tonight, or today, depending where you are.
So whatever the time is. So thank you, Rami, and pleasure seeing everybody here and having Edahn with us. Edahn and I speak the same language, literally, and it doesn't sound too young for Young Diamantaires, but we have actually known each other for the odd 20 years, since the beginning of the 2000s. Edahn has been really around the industry doing a lot of the work with analytics, trends, and data. So just on the official side, Edahn is currently managing partner at Tenoris, a trend analytics company supplying retail and consumer trend data to the industry. And he's also owner-manager at Edahn Golan Diamond Research and Data. Speaks for itself, I think. Research and data for the industry with tons of insights and action items for all members of the trade. Before we delve into the data, Edahn, I'd like to go into something a bit personal because these days the journey of a diamond are very common. And we're going to talk about that also very shortly. But what I'd like to hear about is about the journey of the person, Edahn Golan, within the diamond industry. What brought you into the industry? What are your passions around the industry? And what's your story in brief, because we need to get to the data.
To be brief, so I joined IDEX Online in 2001, just before they launched. You're looking for somebody that has a background in economics and understands internet and data and news. And I formed the news department. We very quickly evolved into a very heavy research side. And in 2013, I formed my company because all I wanted to do is really just focus on research. And that's what I've been doing ever since. In the past couple of years, 2-3 years, I've been working with, I formed Tenoris. Usually what I do is analysis. So it's data, I'm putting it in context. Tenoris, well, we found that there is a shortage of very granular data about the jewelry industry, because as I think you guys can relate to that, as diamond traders, you are usually at least once removed from consumers, and sometimes 3 times removed, right? You sell to the jewelry manufacturer sells to the retailer. So it's difficult to understand what's really happening downstream. And because the diamond journey is a lengthy one, time-wise, sometimes we make a series of decisions or investments that don't prove to be worthy once we get to the store. So we thought, my partner, Chris Casey, and myself, that we should create a company that looks at the data and can provide it at near raw data to the diamond industry and the jewelry industry, so they can plan how to operate with understanding of what consumers are actually buying and what's happening at retail. So that's what stood behind Tenoris. Plus, it was COVID and we had a lot of dead time. So it was a terrific time to play around with software and, trying to move forward with something else.
So one thing led to another, and here we are now. So Edahn, thank you for that. Before we go into the presentation, we have our Young Diamantaires beautiful crowd with us. As stated on the screen from right to left, we have Molefi Letsiki from South Africa. Hi, Molefi.
Afternoon, guys.
Hi, Rami Baron, who we've all met, of course. Melissa Smith, Rami Baron from Australia, sorry. I need to step back. Melissa Smith from Belgium, dear Melissa. Charlotte Rose from the UK, England. Welcome, Charlotte. Bebe Bakshi from Australia. Again, Australia is very popular today.
Yes.
Chris Zottel from Germany. Hi, Chris. And Devan Shah coming to us all the way from India. So without further ado, Edahn, let's go on to the presentation. Stage is yours.
So today I want to talk primarily about three things. It's all focusing around the challenges that we're facing today. It's a good time to do that as we are closing the year. There we go. A little bit about the data I'm going to use here. This is data sourced by Tenores. So it's a trend analytics company. That means that we collect data on a monthly basis, raw data from retailers. We're talking about 1,300 stores. So it's not companies, it's stores. And this is at a data, the data is at a individual transaction level, which means we know per item when it was purchased by the retailer, for how much, and from whom actually, and we know when they sold it and for how much, and we can tie the sold item to the purchased item, and we know the characteristics of the item, so we can do all sorts of manipulation on the data. We know we can calculate from that, for example, gross margins. We're looking in total at about $3 billion worth of annual transactions. This is sales by retailers. It includes, of course, inventory because we collect what they buy and we know what left. And this is considered a very good representative sample from the standpoint of specialty jewelers. It's about 6.5% of the market. Statistically, it means that we're looking at about 99% accuracy with a very small margin of error. So it's a very good reflection of that. And then, of course, it's a good reflection. It's a very decent reflection of the general US market. So I think it gives us a good understanding of what's happening there. I think we're facing three main challenges. My assumption when talking with you guys is that you are primarily dealing with natural diamonds. So there's a decline in natural diamonds and demand. There is a rise in demand for lab grown. And I'm going to talk about that briefly. And I understand that there is a greater interest in the G7 Russian diamond sanctions. So I will talk about that in a little bit length. Just a quick overview. Overall, diamond jewelry sales declined this year pretty sharply. So we're looking at a decline of 11% by value. If we look only at loose diamond sales at retail, so as you know, or you may not know, you know what, let me show you an example right here on the screen. If you look at this ring, you can find at retailers just the shank, just the semi-mount, just this part of the diamond without the diamond, this part of the ring without the center stone. So retailers often sit on an inventory of both semi-mounts and loose gems in general, primarily diamonds, and then they can customize the diamond ring according to the customer's taste and budget. That allows us to track loose sales, and we see that the value of sales decline. So this is a combination of both a decline in price and a decline in unit sales. Before going any deeper about this, we need to keep in mind that in November, we actually saw an increase in these sales, both in price, both in value and in units. And if you see that the value, let me pull out my pointer again. If you see that a value rises more than the units, that means there was also an increase in the average price. So instead of setting, so if we sold 100 items at the same price, and then 110, then there's a 10% increase in value in units. But if units was up 10% and value more, that means that we sold for more than the value. Pretty basic, but sometimes there's a need to state that. And there is one reason really for all of this. This is not a loss of interest in diamond jewelry. It's just because we're looking at a very unusual rise that stems from COVID. You know, before we go to the next one, I want to point this out for a moment. It's not only there was an exceptional and really, truly an unprecedented rise in demand. There are a number of things we should see this in context. One is always remember the following. At a time of deep despair, this happens during an international pandemic. We see this after major terrorist attacks such as 9/11. We saw this after a major economic fallout such as in 2008. We saw that after major natural disasters such as after Fukushima. We gain a renewed appreciation of life. Two things happen in that context. One, first of all, our first reaction is to sort of hold back. Immediately, we cut our spendings. We're cautious. We want to know what's happening. But the other thing that we do is because we get this renewed appreciation of life, we also express it. And one of the best ways to express it is by buying jewelry. And there are three trends that we can see that always happens in this context. One, jewelry sales bounces back very quickly, much faster than other items. Two, it spurs proposals, wedding proposals. And three, our average spend per item jumps as well. We tend to buy less for more. And this is exactly what we saw during COVID. In 21, there was also COVID, because it was a pandemic, there was also the issue of social distancing, which delayed a lot of weddings and marriages. But still, the general trend is the one that we always see. So if you look at this part of the graph, and we're looking here at what is a change in demand. So what I did here is I just took the general change in sales, and I calculated against it the change of two sets of items: low-cost items below $500 and high-cost items above $10,000. So if you look during mid-COVID, the sales of lower-cost items is declining, and that goes all the way up till mid-August, still underperforming. High-end items have the complete opposite behavior. I mean, literally mirroring it. In late 22, a year ago, that changed. Both items were underperforming the market. And then we saw that there was a big shift towards low-cost items and a movement away from high-cost items. So two things we can understand from this. One, once the pandemic era ended, there was a decline in spending, and I said earlier, a higher average expenditure per item, so that ends. There's also, in this case, a concern in the American market. This is all the United States. There's also a concern in the American market about the future, the economic future. And people are when they spend on lower cost items. So that's, once again, against a very large up. So when we look at this trend, this is against a very, very large rise in demand. When we try to understand in the market today and try to do a little bit of a forecast for this year and a little bit into the future, because a year ahead isn't a very long term look, we're seeing a cyclical behavior. People are buying a lot less, and we know that it always changes. Once there's a decline in demand, it's always followed about a year later in a rise in demand. Polished prices are now very low. Once the December sales are over, we're going to see what kind of demand we're going to get in January from retailers, and then the diamond market springs to life and starts replenishing that. It will definitely, and it will always happen. There's always an increase in prices in January. I think it will be extended. I don't know how much. It depends on a couple of things, and I'll talk about them in a minute. Of course, rough prices, when I wrote this, rough prices didn't start to rise yet. We already know that there's a firming up of prices, and there is a trend of larger average stones that I believe will continue. We'll talk a little bit about lab grown, and I'll explain where this is coming from. One thing I want you to pay attention to is the US presidential elections, which in theory has nothing to do with the diamond industry. However, diamonds jewelry is primarily sold, definitely by value, in two main areas in the United States, where we can break them down into two. First of all, the coast, the West Coast and East Coast. And secondly, in the bigger cities. So not only LA and New York, but also in Boston, Chicago, etc. There are a lot less sales and a lot less stores and a lot less spend per item in what's called American heartland. So in Montana and Indiana and those sort of places. So just keep that in mind. Now think about elections in the United States and how the Democrats and Republicans are positioned. The Democratic Party's power base is in the coast, East and West Coast, and in the bigger cities. The Republican power base is actually in country, once again, American heartland. If the Democratic candidate takes the presidential election in the United States once in 4 years, the first Monday of November. If in the beginning of November, Biden, who's likely to be the candidate, will win, then there is a very positive sentiment in the coasts and the bigger cities. There is a view that the future is bright. There is trust in the economy, and the willingness to spend more during the November-December period is higher. Conversely, if the Republican candidate wins, then what we see that in those big cities and on the coast, there's a concern about the future, and that the economy won't go well, and therefore there's a tightening of the economic belt, the household expenditure. And there is always a correlation between the results of the US presidential elections and sales. It's not a strong one, it's not a very strong one, but it always has an impact. And because we're looking at sort of a iffy period as it is, I think this is important. I want to put in this context another thing, and that is the US economy is doing very well. If you just look at the numbers, it's doing very well. The issue in the US is that the consumer sentiment inaccurately believes that things are not going well. And that may sway things a little bit, especially who you vote for, but keep that in mind. Lab-grown is going through the roof. Year to date, so this is year to date includes January to November. Prices are up, sales are up. Pardon me, not prices. Sales are up by value, by units. And if we look at loose, prices are definitely up. If we look at what happened in November, then we see that year over year sales are up. But once again, notice this trend. So unit sales are up by 55%, but values only by 18.5%. This is the opposite trend that we saw before. So unit sales are up, by a greater amount, by a greater percentage than by value, that means that prices are down. I'm not showing this here, but what we're really seeing is that while growth and demand for lab-grown continues, the rate of growth is declining. So there's a slowdown in that. If we look at the average retail price, so as I noted over here, average retail price is down. The average price of loose stones is down even more. The reason for that is in lab grown, the technology allows us to generate bigger and bigger stones. Because prices are declining, there's greater demand for stones as prices are declining. There's a greater demand for larger stones. The result of that is that every time there's sort of a new product that comes in lab grown, every time we move up, there is a decline, a pressure down to reduce prices of the smaller items. But as you know, you compress them, you know that it slows down. It's always at the very beginning that the fall is sharper. And when we're looking about loose, this is larger items. We're looking at jewelry, there's also the element of price of the metal, primarily silver and gold, but that's why this is slower than this decline. If we look at market share by units and value, you see that it's constantly growing. This is only year to date. I think that by the end of this year, we'll know this in about 2 weeks. This number, less than 2 weeks, this number will be a little bit larger. So it's constantly grabbing market share, and it's something to keep in mind. I think the one area we'll see a decline is especially in value, which was above units, and now it's unit sales is catching up. And I think that in the long term, we're going to see a greater increase in unit sales than in value. This summer, we saw an interesting trend. So once again, talking about loose, we hit the 50-50 mark. What was very surprising was that it stuck to it. To the point of equilibrium, surprisingly, just smack at the 50%. This is 5 months of equilibrium. So since July, August, September, October, and November. So 5 months, it's a trend. I mean, the economic definition of a trend is more than 3 months. So three consecutive periods. So this is a very interesting trend. And I think it's a combination of, this is units, so it's not price, so it's not a decline in prices. I think we reached a point in consumer demand for lab grown where it's no longer the early adapters. Now we're looking at a maturation of the market, which also explains why the growth rate is slower. So it's not that there's a loss of interest, it's just looking for a new footing. So the forecast, I think it's a no-brainer, continued growth. The pace of growth is slowing down, and it's going to continue to slow down. If you look at global demand, it's at a measured pace. If you look at, in general, in demand, we're talking about 85% of demand is in the United States, only 15% for the rest of the world. And it's primarily an English-speaking country sort of product. So it's growing in Australia, it's growing in New Zealand, it's growing in the UK, it's growing in Canada, it's growing in India. The growth that we see in China is kind of, first of all, it's kind of difficult to track because the Chinese have a lot of cash sales, so they don't want to share their data. But I think that there's another element, and that is of undisclosed sales, because we know that a lot of goods are being entered the country and produced in the country, but we do not see it in sales. So that's why I suspect a lot of undisclosed sales. The price erosion is a major issue. Among my clients, I have lab-grown growers. Some of them are already operating at a cost plus basis. You can buy a lab grown rough for about $30 per carat, which is nothing. And that's very close to the cost of growing. There's still a lot of profitability, especially in retail, but also in wholesale. But that is eroding as well. The bottom line is, if you're selling a product as the same but cheaper, consumer demand is going to be, give me for less. So at the end of the day, that's the biggest challenge, and I think that the lab-grown industry will need to reposition itself. I don't see that they're doing it or getting organized even to do that. So that's a major thing there. G7. Okay, guys, it's a complicated issue. I'm just going to touch it and I can give you as much details as I have. So let's just talk about it. There are 4 major points made, and so let's dive into them. First of all, starting next week, starting on Monday, there's a complete ban on gem quality diamonds mined or polished in Russia. So this adds to the rough that was until now and expanding it to goods coming out of Russia. Between you and me and the internet gods, this is almost meaningless because most of the production in Russia is for the local consumer market. Very little of that is being exported. If you want, I can provide you with some numbers on how much Russian polished was provided to Japan, the United States, etc. It's minute. So, but it's a starting point. Phase 2 on March. Officially, they say this is the target date, so it could be earlier, but it'll probably be later. The sanctions were expanded to include diamonds processed in third countries. Basically, there's a loophole in the American law. The American law says that that any item that went through a major transformation in another country is a product of that other country. In other words, if I polished Russian diamonds in India, they're Indian diamonds from the standpoint of the American law and regulations. And that was a major loophole because essentially, India is not part of the sanctions. Rough was exported to India. India polished them, exported them to the United States. The Russians continued to make the money that the United States was hoping to stop and failed. So now they are trying to close that loophole. So first of all, the United States will not recognize Russian diamonds polished in India as Indian diamonds, but rather as Russian diamonds. So first of all, this is an act within the United States. This expands the ban on this requires traceability. Let's make it simple. The other thing we should say about this is actually starting in January, that Russian diamonds will not be allowed into the EU. So the G7, it's called the G7, but it's actually a lot more countries. So it's the United States, Canada, and Japan. And then in Europe, we have 4 countries, including the UK. And then the EU's and its 27 countries are also included in this. So basically, Europe and the United States and North America, plus Japan, are blocking any natural diamond coming mined in Russia. In fact, it should be stated, it's not just mined. If it was transferred through Russia, so Katoka, it comes out of Africa. If it goes through Russia, it's going to be banned. If the Russians want to continue to enjoy the Katoka goods, they will need to route them from Angola directly to Antwerp, have them scanned there, and then enter the legitimate stream. The next thing to keep in mind is what happens in September. So this is a pretty major part in this. First of all, they added watches, jewelry, and lab grown to this. It's not stated here. They are also declared. So now they just. So this is the text. The G7 member, those G7 members who are major importers of rough diamonds will establish a robust traceability-based verification and certification mechanism within the G7. Long story short, they're talking about Antwerp. And here's the bombshell. There were a bunch of propositions presented to the G7 EU, the United States, etc. And the belief was all along that the WDC's proposal will be accepted, mainly because there was a lot of acceptance and adoption within the diamond industry, and they did a very good process of discussing this with the countries, with the governments. While in Antwerp, the Antwerp proposal, the AWDC proposal, was presented to the Belgian government, and that was it. What happened in effect was, and then there were a couple of others, but they were less important and less viable. The result was, and details are slowly being added, the result was that the G7 decided to adapt not only the Belgium, the most strict proposal on the table, they added to it elements that weren't really in it in the beginning. For example, lab grown. So this is an odd process. There's a lot of talk in the market that Antwerp can digest all these goods. The answer is they can, because there are a bunch of exceptions that are already built into the system, and I can detail them as you want. But let's put it this way. Because Canada is a G7 member country, mining in Canada, goods mined in Canada, won't have to go to Antwerp. So that's one element. The other thing to keep in mind is they do not know, when I say they, I mean G7, do not know what traceability system they will use. But the bottom line is that you may have heard the G7 constantly in its releases and its discussions with the market mention SWIFT. So SWIFT is a way, is a platform, an online platform that where every movement of US dollars above, I believe, $10,000 is noted in it. This gives two things. One, it's an online system. Every bank, everybody who deals with moving money has to provide the data to this entity. Two, and it doesn't belong to anybody. It's, in theory, it's an open entity. In practice, only the US government really has the ability to look into it, which means it gives government oversight to movement of US dollars. Now think, what is it that they could possibly mean when they're talking about a SWIFT system for the diamond industry? In other words, there will be governmental oversight on an online system where all diamonds will be tracked. Now, it's not all diamonds literally, because, and this is something that just came out. So in March, when we're talking about processing in third countries, the limitation is on goods from 1 carat and above, both rough and polished. And then in September, they're going to decrease that to include half carats as well and above. There isn't one system that could cover everything from market to market, from mine to finger, to store. There is a belief, there's an understanding that this will be a border control, similar to KP. So if you are, say, a digger in Northeast Congo, obviously you don't have access to serene technologies that will take a look and document your diamond. That basically everything is going to be brought to customs. At customs, they're going to document it and in some way, and then ship it to Antwerp to be fully documented on the system. So, and the cost is on the importer, by the way. So that's how the system at its most basic is supposed to work. And once again, if you want to know details, I'll share them. So this is the late addition is the lab-grown jewelry and watches. The fourth point is the G7 said that they will continue consultation with both producing countries, African countries primarily Angola and Botswana started to protest the decision. So that's why they mentioned producing countries. Then they talk about manufacturing countries because India immediately sprung into action, saying, "Well, come on." One of the biggest worries in all of these systems throughout the years is that um, the cost will be laid on the manufacturing and the midstream of the diamond industry. So that's why the producing country, India jumped into action. When the EU more detailed announcement came out, there was no mention of consultation. That being said, I already know that in mid-January, in around the 14th, I believe, there's going to be a G7 delegation in Botswana, and there will be discussions with at least Botswana. I know that Angola already announced that they won't be there, so God knows how that will end. A couple of points that we must understand. First of all, nothing is finalized. So without knowing what the system will look like, the traceability system, so we know serene will probably be, we can assume that serene will be a big part of it, but there was a whole lot of discussion with serene. So we don't know how much serene is capable of doing this, will do it, deployed. That's one point. There's a need to, as I said, to route everything through Antwerp, almost everything. India and African countries, we don't know if they'll be consulted. As I said, there's going to be a lot of oversight, higher costs. So it doesn't matter who or how it will be done. There's going to be costs associated with that. I believe the mining companies will need to bear a big chunk of it, at least early on. And then it will be definitely passed to lab grown, to the midstream. By the way, do you guys have an understanding of where profitability is along the pipeline? Who makes the most money and how much? I'll give you basic numbers. Gross margins. At mining, it's 20 to 30% over the last 20 years, so it's an average. At retail for diamonds, natural diamonds, it's around 35%, usually moving between 32 and 36%. For bigger goods, it's a little bit bigger. So 1 carat's 42%. And then at the midstream, 2, 3, 6%. That's a common margin. That's gross margin. It's margins. But at the end of the day, if you look at the cost of machinery, et cetera, that's you guys could probably tell me if I'm right or wrong. So once it's passed to the midstream, it needs to be pushed to retailers if they like it, if they hate it, especially in the United States, just tell them this is the cost of doing business these days. That's it. And then the consumers will need to get this. The long and short of it, there's a lot of resistance to this. Belgium, that is in theory going to be the one that benefits the most of this, is unhappy as well. They don't believe that everything should be routed through them. They know it's not good for the business, and they, I believe, are primarily worried about the negative sentiment that will create. And I think we should focus on a couple of things. One, this less important to the diamond industry, but be prepared to the fact that the US dollar may not remain the dominant currency of the diamond industry or the prime or the sole currency. That's one thing. The other thing is that there are opportunities in this. The diamond industry will need, for example, if you're an Indian manufacturer or a South African manufacturer where you continue to accept Russian goods, the bottom line is that you'll need very, very strict segregation. I know at this point, all of the systems can be fooled, bar none. That being said, it will behoove us to accept the fact that the government's decided and it's a major machinery that's just moving forward. We should not try to stop it. We should just try to sort of steer it a little bit to fit our needs. So there is room for negotiations, but we need to talk with the government. So that means pressure of the diamond industry on their government representatives. I know in Israel, they're already talking with the government. In the United States, they're talking with both the State Department and the White House. The same is happening, of course, in Botswana. India is also talking with New Delhi for the past few weeks in a very intensive way. India, at the end of the day, will probably sit on the fence because they want to be good with the United States, but also with the Russians. But we can steer it in a very positive way. For example, there is a claim coming out of the lab-grown section that says lab-grown is the ethical component of this all. And this is really hurting the natural diamond industry because at the end of the day, we're selling to people that aren't really knowledgeable. They can catch a phrase that is out there, and this is not good for us. So for the natural diamond industry. So this gives us an opportunity to say, look, there's a tracking system that measures everything from the mine to the store. It's online. Governments can look at it. There's complete oversight from outside third party. And it's there to ensure that indeed everything is kosher all along the way. So that, in that regard, is a very important element that we should keep in mind and feel comfortable promoting because it's true. The other thing we should keep in mind is, this is a warning that I give to everybody when I'm talking about G7, we're generating two tracks for diamonds, first class and second class. There's going to be the kosher lane and there's going to be the non-kosher lane. And the non-kosher lane, the gray diamonds, are going to move around and not only around the G7 sanctions, but also there will be those who will try to push the goods into the G7 countries because at the end of the day, it's the United States is half of the market. So more than half of the market these days. So this is something that will possibly brew. And if it indeed happens, it will eventually explode and it could possibly hurt the diamond industry. So we need to be very cautious about that and do, first of all, not only avoid it, that will be my first recommendation, but if you know about anything like that, find ways to see how this could be put out and killed and nipped at the bud, because if we come out with a claim that we're ethical, and then somebody's going to prove that all these Russian diamonds are indeed coming into the United States, and it's because somebody in the diamond industry did something, or bogus paperwork or whatever it is, this is going to be a major, major fiasco for the industry. And just think about it. The movie Blood Diamonds is still echoing in the background of consumers that were toddlers when the movie came out. So,
let's see how this one unfolds.
Be cautious. That's it. I'm done.
Okay. Edahn, thank you very much for a fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
Things tend to be, facts and figures tend to be sometimes tiring, but not here. Definitely exciting. Okay, I don't know where to start with the questions, so I'll hand the stage to my friends who will do it best, I'm sure. Let me gather the questions and we'll take it one at a time. So we have the first question coming from a Mr. Molefe Letsiki in South Africa.
Very informative, and I think, for the time where we are in the end of the year and looking forward to 2024, looking forward to, a better year ahead. And then with these numbers, it's very informative, and it gives us a perspective of where to look into or go into the new year. But then with all of that said, looking at the natural versus lab grown, we have now come to almost 50, not almost, like 50-50 market share do we then, especially looking at the G7 restrictions that are coming up in the new year, can we then say 2024 or going forward, we could see or anticipate a rise in more lab-grown demand than natural, mainly because, with the restrictions, it could be more easily accessible to have lab-grown over the natural?
No, I don't think that's the case, and I'll say why. First of all, so lab-grown is tossed into this system. There is a claim by a couple of people that somebody bitterly complained to one of the government officials about, all these sanctions really shackling the hands of lab-grown. So versus, shackling the hands of natural versus lab-grown. So they said, okay, so let's just we'll add lab-grown to it. I don't know how true that story is, but the bottom line is that what generates sales is consumer demand. Doesn't matter how you look at it. If there's consumer demand, there's sales. If there's no consumer demand, there are no sales. So if we try to understand, if we keep that in mind while we try to figure out what the future will look like, I don't think G7 will have a negative impact or a positive impact on what consumers want. I think it's how we present our story, and how do we tap into each demographics needs, abilities, and desires. So it's really in the hand of what we say and what the lab grown says, and it works from there.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that.
Appreciate it. And on to the next one. We have Charlotte Rose from England in the UK. Hi, Charlotte. Great having you with us. Please go ahead.
Hi. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation. It's great to end the year having that data that we can take forward into next year. So my question is, for a newcomer and even those that are really well established in the industry, navigating this issue of Russian sanctions is especially complicated and challenging when coupled with all the other complexities of starting a natural diamond business in the first place. So how best can young diamantaires, new people to the industry, access the data and updated requirements for traceability so that they can ensure that they're fully compliant?
Okay, so let's break this down. First of all, this is an issue first and foremost on the rough level, because it means that goods will need to go through Antwerp to be documented. Once the documentation is there, so think of it in terms of you tag the product, and let's ignore for a moment the complexity of how do you follow it through manufacturing. But once you tagged it, let's say you took a marker and just put a little, icon on it, you drew a little star on it, and then you can always follow it. Once it gets to the store or enters the United States, right, that's where it goes through a governmental oversight, there will be an ability to identify it. Then all they do, they don't need to, it's carefree for you, right? All they need to do is look at the system. If it's there, it's great, they'll let it in. If it's not, they will likely confiscate it. That's what happens with KP goods that enter countries, and there are questions about it. So that's one component. The other component is that, as I said earlier, there are a lot of unknowns. The technology that will be used wasn't selected yet. But I can tell you this. First of all, I will be publishing in the coming days some data with the details that I kind of mentioned that I have, but I didn't share yet. It's just very, very, very technical. I'm not going to be very, very technical in what I'm going to write, but I'm going to give enough for people to know where we're standing right now. And I will probably update it over time. So that's one thing. The other thing is, if your business is with the United States, there's an organization called JVC, which is essentially a legal consultancy service for the jewelry industry, and they'll be able to help. you got to remember one thing about international agreements of this kind. At the end of the day, it requires local legislation. And as you may have noticed from what I shared so far, the UK said one, so the UK said something, and then a few days later, the United States, the White House said, I mean, it was 10 Downing, and then the White House, and then it was quiet, and then the G7, which is sort of an ad hoc organization, really, because there's no management team, said something, and then the EU came out with all these details, and the G7 said something else, and then the US said something, you know, so it's not clear how this is going to work, and that kind of hints to each legislation will look a little bit different. I know that I understand that there are some deals already being cut within Belgium about how this will be legislated and who will agree and what do they get in return. But at the end of the day, it's going to be very local. And I think that in every country, there's going to be a need to both consult with organizations such as JVC, when it gets to your local behavior and rules and regulations, as well as I hope there will be some way to, it's actually a very good question in that respect, a central body that will say, okay, I am importing from Africa, I'm operating out of the UK, and I'm selling to, I don't know, Germany. You know, what do I need to know about each country's regulations in order to make sure that everything I do is up and up? It's not there. And I think that all of these deadlines are very nice, but at least some of them, at least one of them, will need to be pushed. So we'll see how that rolls out in reality.
Okay, thanks.
I know it wasn't a comforting answer, but
no, it's perfect. Thank you.
But it is what it is, right?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thanks, Edahn. And you said we're not there. Within the YDs, we have a saying, we're not there yet. So we'll get there eventually, in time.
Yes.
Okay, so the next question comes from a person that everybody within the YD, Young Diamantaires circles knows very well, and quite fondly, if I may say so. Chris Dottel out of Germany. Hi, Chris. How's it going?
Hey, thank you, Shai, for those nice words, and Edahn, especially for being here today, giving us these great insights. My question is, looking at the whole process, the G7 process and the sanctions, we already have a process in the diamond industry called the Kimberley process, where a lot of countries, including the United States, China, India, European Union, are members of. So why or what's going to be the whole issue of having, let's say, we have the Kimberley process already, why do we need another process controlling where diamonds come from? Where's your insight on that, how these two things can kind of work together or coexist, if you put it that way?
Okay, so first of all, we need to zoom out a little bit and remember that what gave birth to this to start with is an American desire to hurt Russia on an economic basis. That's why there are sanctions on specific people. There's sanctions on financial dealings with Russia. Diamonds is not a big part of it. Gas is bigger. Metals is bigger. So that's the starting point. Secondly, once you decide that you want to do something like that, how do you do that? So you need to spell it out and design a system that can do that. That being said, KP has a number of features that are making it difficult to use in this context. So the first one requires a unanimous decision. So as long as Russia votes against that, nothing is going to pass. Secondly, there is, on every certificate, when you export rough, one of the things you need to note is not only where you're shipping from and where you're shipping to, but there's also a section called origin. Origin is where the diamonds were mined. At the very beginning, when they started building the system, De Beers said, well, we have a problem because, what do we do with goods that come from Canada and Botswana and from yada, yada, yada? It's all mixed, and we created the De Beers mix, right? So there's a parcel that deals with these sort of goods and a parcel. And I mean, so now we won't be able to sell the parcels, in a smart way. And Rio Tinto at the time had a mine in Australia and had a mine in Canada. So all of these companies started to say, look, this is a little bit more complicated than that. And the idea of a mixed origin option for origin was introduced. What it means is that you can take goods from one country and another country and more and mix it. In this context, I can buy a parcel in India. If I sit in India, an Indian trader could buy a parcel that comes from Alrosa, throw it in one diamond that came from anywhere else, even De Beers, close back the parcel and say, now it's a mixed origin. Mixed origin, when it arrives in the United States, will be allowed in the United States. I'm not talking about Israel or Belgium. The United States accepted mixed origin parcels. That is part of why the sanctions that we had so far on Russian diamonds were ineffective. Goods could still move around, and the result was that instead of trying to change KP, the whole idea of mixed origin in this context. So if you want to enter goods, if you want to bring goods into the G7 sanction sphere, you won't be able to do that with a parcel that its origin is mixed.
Okay.
So, and that's one of many, many, many little, finer print sort of items. I've been spending nights, long days and long nights, reading what everybody wrote, trying to consolidate this. So there are a lot of details to this, but it's not fully clear. So the KP is not the tool to do this, especially that it only looks at rough. They're interested in adding, polished watches and jewelry as well. Difficult to track when it gets to a watch, because once you close the encapsment, it's you can't pull out the diamond and look at it. It's very difficult to assess it. So KP is not fit for purpose. I have a small suspicion that long term, this system could possibly replace KP. One of the features of this system is that it does not require unanimous decision, so there could be a majority decision. We're going to use this system to block these kind of items.
Okay. So, Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you, Edahn.
Edahn, thanks. One thing to note, knowing the Kimberley process certification scheme and its prominent history within the diamond exchange in showing the value of traceability, value of natural diamonds coming out of the ground, I wouldn't discount it as a means of showing, the traceability and showing these values going forward. Okay, so Edahn, next question comes from Bebe Bakshi from Australia. I'll take a risk. I'll say, when you were talking about traceability, I saw Bebe nodding really quickly and enthusiastically. So I would guess, although I may be wrong, that her question has something to do with that. So Bebe, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Shai. Edahn, thank you so much. It was a very informative presentation. I know you touched base on traceability. I just want to dig a bit deeper. You mentioned SWIFT. I want to know if eventually G7 members are going to use AI provenance report from diamond and from grading companies, or like a third-party company like Sarin you mentioned, or Tracer by De Beers. Do you think all of these can all combined help G7 members, or they are going to go to a whole different direction and use a totally different system?
I'll start from the end. The answer is that the only way to move forward quickly is to create a platform that connects to other platforms, existing platforms. So let's talk about Tracer and Sarin, for example. Tracer is very good at a very particular part of the manufacturing process. Of course, it gets all of the De Beers goods at mining. That being said, it does not exist on the consumer level. So if you walk into a store and you say, well, I want to use tracer to check my diamond and see that indeed it came from, it's impossible, even if it's a Forever Mark item. Forever Mark will tell you, we know that this, but it's going to be, but beyond that, it's near impossible. Serene, on the other hand, bought GCal a while ago, and now it has a presence in the stores. GCal is an American retail-facing company. It's a certifying, it's a lab, but at the end of the day, that's where they're located and that's where their strength is. And that gives Serene a foothold in a market, in an important segment that De Beers isn't there. So that alone makes sense. Let's connect these two. Everledger is very good at both manufacturing and at retail, but it also has jewelry, which neither Tracer or Serene have. So at the end of the day, I think the best solution will be a combination of some of them. Some of the proposed systems are paper trails. So paper trails may be used as a starting point. So here's my invoice. This is where I bought it from. This is how much. Then, you know, I can show you that this is what I sold and this is to whom I sold it. The buyer can show that indeed it was purchased. So that's a paper trail. The problem with paper trails, so it's a good quick start. The problem with paper trails is it's very easy to forge. At the end of the day, keep in mind the issue isn't those that are acting honestly, but those that are trying to game the system. And unfortunately, that's always the way we look at those sort of processes. You know, how robust are they and how foolproof are they? So does that answer your question?
Yes, so I think
Not fully,
eventually, like all of them will be on blockchain or something, like just to be safe. I don't know, like eventually we are going to use all of the technology we have at hand to maintain. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bebe, and thank you, Edahn, for that. Next question comes from India. Devansh Shah. Devansh, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Shai. Thank you, Edahn. It was a great presentation, and more than just the data, which also is usually not so accessible for us. The explanations and the insights they helped a lot in understanding how to navigate through this. So my question is a little more about the a few data points that you shared. Is there any study or information on how many percentage lab grown diamond consumers are those who are switching from natural consumers to lab consumers versus those who are, you know, adding to the diamond industry as new consumers overall because of, you know, the lower price point?
It's actually a very interesting question because it touches on a question that the industry asked itself a lot up until recently, and that is, are lab grown expanding the category or cannibalizing the category? And the answer to both questions is yes. So I'll give you two quick examples. One is what we're seeing with Pandora. Pandora added lab grown, and now it has a product that is in many ways tapping into a market of low priced, nice, great design, you know, accessibility, etc., but to a consumer base that would have otherwise maybe not purchased a natural diamond, right? If they would have, it would have been the PK goods. And the PK goods, as we all know, don't look that good. They don't have that shine of shine. You know, you can see that there are a lot of inclusions. And now all of a sudden you can get a lab-grown jewelry item. So those guys are new. So all of those categories and to the heart of your question, are there numbers for that? The answer is no. I mean, maybe I could calculate it, but it will be a lot of gross assumptions. But that is one category. Another area is where cannibalization takes place. And in particular, I want to talk about diamond engagement rings, because we know that engagement rings are almost always with diamonds. We're talking about 90-something%. And people are buying engagement rings because they're getting married. It has nothing to do with lab grown or natural or any of that. So this is sort of a hard category, right? We know that if there was no lab grown, all of those people, and the numbers would have been the same, would have purchased a natural diamond.
Natural.
If we look at diamonds, and I'm going to give you a figure for the past couple of years. So let's look at, if I remember correctly, the number is around 16%. But if you look at diamond engagement rings and what share those that are set with lab grown are, classic. As I want to use the system, the database is refreshing.
Never mind, we'll get back to it. Okay.
So that is the area where we can estimate it. Here we go. So we said diamonds, engagement rings, and as I said before, semi-mounts, because this is primarily the area that we're talking about. And the share of lab grown, and let's just take a look at 22, was 24%. If you look at it in 23 to date, it is 36%. So a third of lab grown, a third of engagement rings are sold with lab grown. In other words, if we look only at cannibalization over there, it's clearly a third of consumers. This is not repeat buyers, right? This is first, because it's primarily a 30-something sort of lab grown, demographically is primarily sold to 30-somethings. So an engagement, how often do you get engaged? So this is definitely the sort of conversion rate that we're looking at.
Devansh,
thank you so much
for the question. I assume so. So thanks, Devansh. Edahn, thank you. And our last question to wrap it up comes from our very own Melissa Smith in Belgium. And Melissa, knowing you, I know you put in the question to wrap it all. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Shai, and thank you very much, Edahn, for your very insightful presentation. I would like to ask a question on behalf of all Young Diamantaires. So how can young diamond professionals navigate the shifting landscape of the industry with challenges of a declining consumer demand for natural diamonds and a rising demand for lab-grown diamonds? And what strategies and skills do you believe will be crucial for young diamond professionals to succeed in the evolving market?
Or in short, how are we all going to make money?
How do we survive tomorrow? Actually, that is the question. How do we survive tomorrow? And I think the answer for that is, and pardon me for providing this sort of answer, I think the answer to that is flexibility. I have a 20-year-old son who is sort of contemplating, what is he going to do with his future? I mean, is he going to study? What is he going to study? And I said to him, study in the United States, and it doesn't matter what's your major. And he was surprised with that. And he asked me why. And I said, for a number of reasons. First of all, you'll live in a different culture, so it'll give you a broader view of the world. Secondly, in the United States, the curriculum is always, the United States, they call it the well-rounded education. Doesn't matter what you study, you have to study a bunch of other fields as well. So that gives you a very broad view of knowledge. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you studied. I learned to be a TV director. I was a TV director for 10 years until I was fed up. And everybody in my family studied one thing. My brother is this far away from a PhD in chemistry. and he deals with real estate today. It has nothing to do with chemistry. It doesn't matter what you study. It gives you tools to understand the world. And I think that what we need more than anything else is a broad set of tools that are flexible, that has a component of curiosity in that, the willingness to be to take a hit, the ability to take a hit and sustain it and learn from it instead of being insulted by it. And then sort of reassess the world and go forward. And I'll give you a practical. I'll put this in a practical terms, in a little bit of a self-serving way. But when I talk with many traders and jewelry manufacturers, a lot of them are a group of very talented people that made a lot of money by having very good basic instincts. So when you ask them, how do you do that? And just break it down for me, and I want to understand, at the end of the day, they can't give you a full answer. At the end of the day, they'll say, but why? You'll ask them why, and their answer is because. And it's not because they don't want to answer. It's because somewhere there's something very deep in how their brain is wired that allows them to make a decision that works very well. I can share with you that I worked with a couple of billionaires, people self-made. And one of the things that all of them have in common, and each one of them is a very different person, is that they think very, very, very differently. And that allows them to make decisions that takes them to the place where nobody else goes. So when I talk with these guys and I ask them, so would you guys be interested in some data? And let me show you a little bit about this. Like, I know better. Some are truly like that, but not everybody is. I'm not like that. I need numbers. I need figures. When I run into an issue in my business, I consult. I talk with this guy. I talk with the other person. I'm always asking questions. And I think that is part of what allowed me to succeed in what I'm doing, because I was always willing to ask a question and see how I incorporate the answer. And I think, and this is not unique to the diamond industry, in every industry and everything we do, I think we should be able to learn, collect data, decide what's important, and set aside those that are not, make a decision, learn when we made a mistake, go back, say, oh, that data piece that I thought was wrong, I do need it, incorporate it, roll it forward. That's the only way to do it. And it's true for everything in life, not just work.
Sounds insightful. Thanks, Edahn, and thanks, Melissa, for the great question. Now, before we wrap up things, I'd like to go again, and of course, thanks, Edahn. Thank you, Edahn, for the beautiful presentation and lengthy Q&A responses, which are very educating. I'd like to go back to the beginning of the webinar and to our founder, Rami Baron, who's actually the one to initiate the idea of running a webinar this time. So, Rami, do you have anything to say before we wrap up? Stage is yours.
Thanks. And thanks, Edahn. Thanks, everyone. I just want to make a small observation in relation to the last thing you just said, Edahn. I want to challenge it. And I know that to some extent, you may or may not agree. But the concept that historically, people have instincts and they say the term because when you ask them why, but you yourself talk about data. And I think that the world that we live in today is so data driven. And those insights where people previously had to rely on their instincts, their feel, that doesn't have to happen today. And it proves itself out. And the magic that you have today is that you could take data that you've provided. And if you use simple AI, and I'm talking about simple stuff, I'm not talking about crazy, heavy analysis, use simple AI and pose some really good questions. And all you have to remember, and I'll pass this on to everyone because I've been spending a lot of time on this, is the best formula I learned to asking a good question is take some data or ask your question in a good context with specific information. You have to put the intent. What do you want to get out of it? and the format that you want. So say I want 10 points on the data that I'm providing you from Edahn's analysis. And then you're going to get some really good insights, because that's where we're all moving. Just a perspective. But again, my perspective, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, because that's where we're all going to progress. And that's where the Young Diamantaires are going to have an edge, hopefully.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And I think Ami, also to go back to your words and addressing some of our young Diamantaires, it comes with experience. So take your time, it will come.
Experience is learning.
Yeah. Now, Edahn, before we say goodbye, I'm sure we had like a few questions here. I'm sure all the Young Diamantaires hearing the webinar are eager to ask more questions, and you should know a few things about us. We are curious, we love to ask questions, and we don't hold back. So what we
Bring it on.
Yeah, bring it on. And by the way, okay, what we thought we would add you to the internal chat, WhatsApp chat of Young Diamantaires, where a few of our friends will be able to grill you with questions, and I'm sure you'll be able to rise to the challenge.
Gladly.
Now, before we go, I think it's never too late coming into 2024. Of course, to thank everybody for being here. Thank you, Edahn, and thank you, dear friends, and thank you, Ami, of course, again, for the initiative. And I'd like to take the opportunity to wish everybody a happy, healthy, prosperous, on a personal note, peaceful 2024 ahead. Thank you very much, all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Really awesome. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Chris.
you.
Thanks,
Happy New
Shai.
Year.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great